Summer can be a bit of a slog. For us, it's often for some reason a rather busy time, and I'm sure we're not alone.
Well, you can beat the summertime sadness and the August angst and enhance your everyday with our excellent sponsor, Via Hemp. This is a company that crafts award-winning premium THC and THC-free gummies.
Each of these gummies is especially designed to cultivate a specific mood. Whether you're looking to get relaxed, get quality sleep, get creative, or just to get focused. If you're 21 or older, you can experience it for yourself and get 15% off your first order with our exclusive code MSheet at viahemp.com. That's VIIAHEMP.com.
I personally enjoyed their grapefruit flow state gummies. This CBG and CBD powerhouse really helped me tap into my productivity. Like, we have had an extremely busy summer, and I feel flow state got me over the finish line a few times when I was editing multiple episodes a day, digging through documents, and knocking out a bunch of interviews.
Via Hemp does not require a medical card, and it ships legally to all 50 states. It's also affordable, and even more so for Murder Sheet listeners who get a special deal.
If you're 21 and older, head to viahemp.com and use code MSheet to receive 15% off. That's VIIAHEMP.com and use code MSheet at checkout. After you purchase, they ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Enhance your everyday with Via.
This season, Instacart has your back to school. As in, they've got your back to school lunch favorites, like snack packs and fresh fruit. And they've got your back to school supplies, like backpacks, binders, and pencils. And they've got your back when your kid casually tells you they have a huge school project due tomorrow. Let's face it, we were all that kid. So first call your parents to say I'm sorry, and then download the Instacart app to get delivery in as fast as 30 minutes all school year long. Get a $0 delivery fee for your first 3 orders while supplies last. Minimum $10 per order. Additional terms apply.
Getting the smile and confidence you've been dreaming about, all from the comfort of your home, isn't a total mystery with Byte clear aligners. Just don't be surprised if all your friends start asking, "What's your secret?" Begin by ordering your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95. Byte clear aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces, plus they offer flexible financing, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
Content warning, this episode contains discussion of the murder of 2 girls as well as suicide. If you or someone you know in the United States is struggling with suicide or suicidal ideation, please contact 988. That is the crisis hotline.
So here we are again. We spoke earlier today about some new filings in the Richard Allen case, because there were actually 3 filings in the case this morning.
But naturally, a very important one wasn't released at the time and is dropped in the late afternoon.
And this is a filing that, as Anya said, it is an important one, important enough that we are taking the time to chat with you about it. And we're going to cover it in some detail and try to figure out what it means. It is a filing by the state for contemptuous conduct.
My name is Anya Kane. I'm a journalist.
And I'm Kevin Greenlee. I'm an attorney.
And this is The Murder Sheet.
We're a true crime podcast focused on original reporting, interviews, and deep dives into murder cases. We're The Murder Sheet.
And this is The Delphi Murders, a contempt of court filing.
So in this filing, which is a verified information of contemptuous conduct, Prosecutor Nick McLeland, who represents, of course, the state, is providing information about conduct by attorneys Brad Rozzi and Andrew Baldwin that he believes merits a finding of contempt.
Yes. Now, this is interesting because it's not quite the first time we've heard about contempt of court being a factor in this case. This is actually something that Andrew Baldwin's own attorney, David Hennessy, threw out as a possible way to mitigate the situation.
Yeah, and
we'll get more to that later.
We're getting more to that a little bit later.
This is cited as a traditional way to deal with conflicts when you have issues between parties and the judge. This is what you would typically see before you would see people get thrown off. Is that fair to say?
Sure.
I mean, not that you see it a lot. It's just, yeah.
Do you want to quickly go through this?
Yes, I think so this is against both Baldwin and Rozzi. It's about their conduct. So Bradley Rozzi and Andrew Baldwin are the targets of this. And initially it kind of gets into just introducing them.
Yeah, and it goes into conduct that actually dates back to November 22nd, 2022.
That's correct.
So what happens then?
So November 22nd, 2022 was when the state of Indiana, Nick McLeland, filed a motion for an order prohibiting the parties, counsel, law enforcement officials, court personnel, coroner, and family members from disseminating information or releasing any extrajudicial statements by means of public communication commonly referred to as a gag order.
And so what's interesting here is that McLeland is giving out some new information. He's giving out some information of what happened behind the scenes.
We didn't see this hearing. Nobody went. This was not public.
And behind the scenes, it sounds like attorneys Rozzi and Baldwin said, well, there's no reason for a gag order because we have no intention of trying this case in the public.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah. So this is interesting because, frankly, in the past, when people have been talking about the press release that Rozzi and Baldwin released, which, of course, happened on December 1st, 2022, we got a copy of it. Other media personnel got a copy of it. I haven't really seen what the big deal is because the gag order was not in place at that time. Because it just felt like, well, they weren't breaking a rule. You can't retroactively be mad at them for that. But what we're hearing here is that actually there had been an in-chambers hearing. Is that what you call it? Like a kind of a discussion?
Where the defense attorney said they had no intention of trying this case in public. Don't even need a gag order because that's not something we would do. And then shortly thereafter, they issue this press release.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, it contextualizes some of the frustration over that more for me because I really didn't understand when people were criticizing them for that. Because it's like, okay, I mean, the states had a long time to do their own thing, so maybe they should be allowed to as well. But if you tell a judge that you're going to do one thing and then if you zig instead of zag, there's going to be problems there and maybe a question about issues of honesty, I guess, trust.
So the gag order is put in place, and then the next thing that Prosecutor McLeland brings up happens shortly thereafter. Sometime in December of 2022, defense counsel Baldwin violates this gag order by, according to him, accidentally sending some protected materials to a man named Brandon Woodhouse. Brandon Woodhouse is, well...
He's not an attorney on this case, that's for sure.
He's not an attorney on this case. He's not a party to the case. He had no right to this material. Andy Baldwin says he sent this to him accidentally. As far as I know, there's no reason to doubt that because I can't think of a rational reason why Attorney Baldwin would choose to send this to Brandon Woodhouse. But what is interesting is after he realizes his error, he does not notify the court. He does not notify anyone. It's not even clear when he notified Brad Rozzi of this mistake.
Because in the chamber's transcript that was released as part of like the instance where Judge Gull spoke to the attorneys and they withdrew from the case, they say she forced them off. You know, she says they withdrew rather than face an embarrassing hearing. So at that time, Baldwin added some clarity and said, Rozzi didn't know. He didn't know. I knew. And so that's kind of interesting because you would think that that would be an issue that would probably come up between co-counsel, at least to kind of figure out how to deal with it.
And you would also expect for the state to be notified and the judge to be notified. But according to Prosecutor McLeland, that did not happen. He writes that this leak of information was not discovered until the state uncovered it on Brandon Woodhouse's YouTube channel in March of 2023. And it was further discovered that Woodhouse was sharing this information with other people who were themselves sharing it with other people. So it was being spread pretty quickly.
Yeah, it got out there pretty fast. We were pretty skeptical about it at first, to be honest. I think our initial instinct was like, this sounds like nonsense. Why would the defense leak anything like this? Also, it's like some kind of weird index discovery product rather than actual discovery. But we were wrong about that. It was real, and it was tied back to the defense directly. Is there any way that Andy Baldwin didn't know that he sent it to this guy? I don't know. The whole thing is so baffling.
So the next thing that we talk about in this information filing is Prosecutor McLeland talks about that there was a protective order governing discovery materials that was granted so that when the state turned over discovery materials, most of which is of a highly sensitive nature, that the defense would be obligated under this order to protect it.
He says, in an effort to prevent the defense from disseminating evidence in this case to people outside the case and or the public, indicating that at that point, maybe the trust had already broken down pretty extensively. The fact that they needed that.
So then, of course, there is the leak of crime scene photos. This was in October of 2023.
So what happened here, and McLeland describes this, but one thing it's important to remember, as we discussed in our leak episode, when this first started happening, before we got the images, there was the publication of a bloody tree photo on Facebook. That came out first. And from this, the families were very aware of that and in communication with the prosecutor. I also think that this explains Brad Rozzi, in one of his communications, accuses the state of knowing about the leak before them and not disclosing it. I think what's all being referred to there is the bloody tree image coming up, people seeing that, the family saying, what is this? And again, once again, I remember when we first saw that image, I thought it was just some creep in their backyard. I really didn't think it was going to turn out to be real.
I remember being astonished then, and I remain astonished that so many people took this image, which showed the blood of a murdered child, and republished it and spread it around everywhere.
Yeah, garbage. Also, we talked about it in our recent episode and, clarified it, but we've since been made aware that Mark Cohen, one of the people directly involved in this leak, who is behind the publication of that image, lied to us. He initially told us that we were the only ones he sent anything to. Then came clean about actually he sent them to a YouTuber several days before us. So at this point, I don't know exactly the timeline because we can't hack into these people's email accounts. But essentially, it's very likely that around this time, you had YouTubers, online skulkers, and miscreants with these images saying nothing to anybody. But they had them, and they just sat on them because this is fun for them.
So to get back to this filing, McLeland writes, Indiana State Police began an investigation into how the photos were leaked. It became immediately obvious that the leaked photos came from the defense. On September 18, 2023, the defense filed a Franks motion with a memorandum in support. The memorandum described the crime scene in gory graphic detail. As part of that memorandum, the defense attached exhibits that were provided in hard copies to the state and the court. Some of the exhibits were side-by-side photos that the defense created and photos of the crime scene that the defense had altered. these photos were the photos that were leaked to the public. So I think that's interesting because it spells out exactly what pictures were leaked, and it spells out what made investigators immediately realize where they came from.
Right. And, when we saw what we saw, we didn't have any context about what exhibits that have been filed because that's all sealed. But it sounds like that from people who were in the know about what had been sealed recently, what had been filed, it became apparent fast.
So the next paragraph here is frankly a bit confusing. I'm going to read it and then let's try to puzzle it out together. The investigators were led to a podcaster who said he got the pictures from an individual that he knew. The investigation led officers to determine the podcasters got the photo from a man that he knew who got them from R. R received the photos from Mitch Westerman, who is tied to the defense.
So are we the podcaster, and why are we one person with male pronouns?
Yes, and also...
Also, nobody was led to us. We called it in that day on October 5th.
And judging from the shocked reaction of the investigator that we spoke with, it was clear that this was the first they had heard about graphic crime scene photos being leaked. To be clear, when we spoke to that investigator, he was well aware of the bloody tree photo. They were not aware of the graphic crime scene photos that Anya and I had been leaked.
Yep. So that's...
And also, if I assume this is us, it says the podcaster got the photos from a man that he knew. I don't know if...
We knew of Mark Cohen at that point because he had been a big part of the Woodhouse leak. So we had communicated with him before, but we did not.
Very minimal communication.
Minimal communication, casual communication. So we were aware of him more so than we knew him. But yeah, so I mean, that's not entirely accurate. Again, why make us one person? I'm trying to rack my brain in case this isn't us and it's somebody else that's involved, but no one else really fits because the timing.
Yes.
And again, we were the ones that uncovered and reported to police and the defense party how that something was happening.
Yes, that is very true.
So that day,
and they weren't led to us. We went to them.
No. Who would have led them? All these YouTubers who just were sitting on these images for their own sick reasons. I mean, I don't know. It's just weird. And it's going to, inaccurate and inexact language like this is just going to spawn more conspiracy theories. So I love that for us.
This is also interesting. McLeland writes that on October 10th, Andy Baldwin, on a conference call with all parties, reveals that Mitch Westerman misappropriated crime scene photos and shared them with others, primarily R. And McLeland writes, ironically, this conversation was hours after investigators spoke to R and determined that Mitch Westerman leaked the photos and he was the connection to the defense. So he's saying that at the time Andrew Baldwin was revealing this, Andrew Baldwin was actually not revealing anything at all to investigators because they already knew.
So this is also interesting because it was Monday, October 9th, that Mitch Westerman confessed to Andy Baldwin that he had done this.
And Andrew Baldwin sent an email to Brad Rozzi, who didn't see it and didn't attempt to call or otherwise notify Brad Rozzi of this.
So this is all, and presumably from what I'm reading here, and I could be wrong, but presumably Westerman at that point had already been contacted by investigators. So he's getting ahead of it with his friend, and then some time is passing before this is all being fully disclosed for some reason.
This episode is sponsored by AutoTrader. Credit scores, down payments, interest rates. Car buying can be a numbers game, but you don't have to be a math expert to get the keys to your dream car. Just use Kelly Blue Book My Wallet on AutoTrader. Crunch your numbers and get your personalized results so you know exactly how much you'll pay each month for your car. It's like having a magic wand for your wallet. Presto! The car you've been wanting is now within reach. So hit the road and leave your calculator at home. Find your next car on autotrader.com.
What makes a life a good one? Is it the adventure you have? Or the friends you find along the way? Maybe it's pursuing your passion while striving to protect, defend, and save what you believe in every single day. So, what makes a life a good one? In the Coast Guard, we think it's all of the above and more, but you'll have to find out for yourself. Visit gocoastguard.com to learn more.
McLeland further writes that on October 12, 2023, Brad Rozzi, in writing in a letter, admits that he and Baldwin had agreed to store the discovery materials in the conference room at Baldwin's office, where, of course, as we know, Mitch Westerman is said to have accessed them, and that by doing this, he was admitting a shared responsibility for this.
So this is McLeland tying Rozzi into it, because
Yes.
you could argue that Rozzi doesn't know Westerman, didn't let him in. This isn't his office. So this is him saying, but you admitted to it, so you're culpable as well.
And I also thought it was interesting that McLeland points out that Mitch Westerman was given a copy of the Frank's memorandum to review prior to it being released. And he notes that the Frank's memorandum and exhibits contained protective discovery information that included very sensitive crime scene photos that were leaked by Mitch Westerman.
So he had access to this. So he had access to those images even.
I'm not sure if that's what McLeland is suggesting. I'm not sure if that's what the actual facts are.
Well, yeah.
But it certainly raises the possibility.
It sounds bad.
Given the fact that what we think was written about us wasn't quite right. So I'm not.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair to be questioning that, because that's egregious if true, but also if it's like, we know that on some level, although frankly, it's been described to me in so many different conflicting ways that I'm kind of more confused than ever. So, I think we need to talk to more attorneys, even though everyone keeps telling us different things. Like, some people act like this is so crazy that he even brought this guy in here, and it's a huge breach and a huge egregious thing even to, be opening up and being, confiding in Mitch Westerman. Other people are telling us that's okay. If he's a trusted colleague who you can bounce ideas off of, a bit of that is okay. And Westerman responded by really messing things up for Baldwin, but the act is not necessarily that bad, unless that happens. And unfortunately it did here. And so I don't know. I think part of how we read him sharing the Frank's memorandum with him really depends on, I guess, how bad it is to do that at all. But frankly, I keep going back and forth because we've been told so much conflicting. Do you have a sense of like how bad that is? Or is it okay?
I think it's okay to discuss strategy with trusted associates.
Right.
At some point, it does cross a line, and if he's literally giving copies to people, and if those copies include crime scene photographs, I don't think it's necessary for a strategy discussion to provide your associates who don't even work in the office with crime scene photos.
It just seems like that's so negligent if that happened. I'm not sure that happened, frankly. It's not clear from the language, and I'm not necessarily going to assume the worst here. It's just one side of the story.
Yes, that's very important.
I think that's important to stress. As you said, in this, we appear to be one single entity. And I know we have a bit of a hive mind between us, but, we're not. We're just two people.
So I also wanted to read this part that I found very interesting. The investigators were able to retrieve messages between R and another individual that showed that R had detailed real-time knowledge about when evidence was submitted to the defense and the contents of that evidence for weeks before the photos were leaked. R also knew the actions defense took in trial preparation, leading law enforcement to believe that this was not a one-time act of one person, but a consistent leak of information and discovery in the case. The investigation showed that Westerman would get information about the case and give it to R, who would then distribute it to other individuals.
Okay. So that is illuminating one aspect of the leak that I think has generally been under-discussed.
It's more than just the crime scene pictures.
It is not a one-time bad decision on Westerman's part. This was an ongoing relationship that was leading to a lot of information getting out there in a relatively short period of time, but a lot of information is spilling out. So I think that elevates it in terms of what Westerman did from perhaps giving into temptation and doing something horrible once versus like, I don't know, just a compulsion of like continuing to do something again and again, despite the fact that it could have horrible repercussions, which unfortunately it did.
If we want to play devil's advocate, we don't know what Westerman knew. In other words, we don't know if Westerman knew that R was sharing this information with others.
No, we don't. But we know, and maybe this makes us jaded, that you cannot trust anybody with anything about this case. You just can't.
We've learned that the hard way over and over
again because we're stupid and we're way too trusting. But it's like, oh, you're nice to us. Let's chat. You don't do that. You can't do that because there is such a economy of information in this case where people trade and sell information as far as like it's clout. It's like if you're in the know, then people want to be around you. So you really just can't talk to people. And I'm surprised because to me, R did not have a legal background.
Yeah, let's stress that for a minute.
He didn't have a legal background. Yeah.
There is arguably a legitimate reason for Andy Baldwin to turn to Mitch Westerman and say, I'd like to have some advice on this. Tell me what you think about the strategy. Now, we can argue maybe at some point that crossed the line and he gave too much information. But the underlying purpose was arguably legitimate. And
something he'd done with Westerman before, as documented in our profile episodes. That's how he works.
There is no purpose whatsoever for Mitch Westerman to share this information with other people.
No. And he knows that he worked in a law office for a long time and understands how the system works. So I'm just so baffled at why he thought that was okay. And I think he ended up, it got out of control and it put other people in harm's way.
And it's cost us months and months on this case. Yeah,
it's been a disaster for the case. And I just don't understand how something like this can happen when it's like, I don't know what he was thinking or why this didn't need to happen. And it's just caused undue pain and suffering and misery. And I hate that. I think this case was already horrible, depressing, and grueling enough for everybody involved that the fact that then this happened on top of it is just, it feels very unfair because it's like everybody's been through enough, frankly. And now we have to deal with this we're going to be feeling repercussions about this for a while. And we could talk about that at the end, but this is only the beginning, I think.
Let's get back to this document. This is something else that I believe is some new information. A search warrant on the iCloud account of Mitch Westerman revealed screenshot photographs of conversations between Mitch Westerman and defense counsel Andrew Baldwin, wherein they candidly discuss the Richard Allen case and candidly talk about the court and the state, displaying a free flow of information that is protected by the court's gag order and the order protecting discovery. So there's a couple of implications there.
Yes.
If Andrew Baldwin is being very candid about the case, we assume he's talking about strengths and weaknesses and what have you. Now he's shared that information and now it's been shared with the prosecution. So that doesn't seem like something that would be in the best interest of Richard Allen.
It's not. One other implication more on the Westerman side of things. He has screenshots of his friend's texts like that? Like, what's the purpose of screenshotting your friend's text? To send it to other people?
Yes, so I would be curious, did he send those screenshots to R? Did he send them to other people?
Was he showing them to people?
Yeah, so the screenshot thing is also interesting. When McLeland said candidly discusses the state, does this mean that in these conversations, Baldwin and Westerman are candidly offering their opinions of Nick McLeland?
Oh, yeah. Almost certainly. And the court. So the judge.
Yes, so all of this is now out there.
That's
so this
awkward.
does not seem to be in the best interests of Richard Allen.
That's another
needless to
thing.
say.
Keeping, in this case, putting things in writing can get you tripped up. I've seen that with people.
Attorneys will always say, don't put anything in writing unless you absolutely have to.
Unless you want it to be on the front page of the New York Times.
Yeah.
Like, don't write anything that you would have a problem with. And this is good advice for everybody for life. Don't put something in writing, that you wouldn't want out there. You have to be judicious about what you put in writing, how you phrase things, because you might be very angry and it feels very justified right now. But, in the cold light of morning, it's going to look a lot different. It may look different out of context. So I'm surprised with the level of putting possibly damaging things about the case in writing going on here in general.
Yeah.
It just seems like not what you would expect.
McLeland says the investigation shows that the defense counsel failed to secure evidence and discovery materials in this case, specifically graphic crime scene photos, which were then distributed to the public and put on the internet in violation of the court order. So I have a question there. Yes, certainly the crime scene photos were distributed to members of the public. To the best of my knowledge, with the exception of the bloody tree picture, I'm not aware of the other pictures being put on the internet.
I'm not either. Could he just be counting the bloody tree picture?
He could be counting the bloody tree picture. I don't mean to minimize the bloody tree picture.
No.
It is outrageous that the blood of a murdered child is being shared. Images of this is being shared.
Yeah, bandied
everywhere.
about like it's friggin' entertainment. It's sick. No, it's not to minimize that. It's just to say we're not aware of any of the other ones getting published in any form. That being said, I don't know. I don't really understand things like the dark web. I've not heard about anything about those being out there, but I do know that the people who had these early on are not trustworthy individuals, and so I'm sure they spread them around to one another, in emails and chats and whatnot. So could it be a reference to that likely outcome?
And here's a point you mentioned earlier at the top of our discussion. Baldwin's attorney, David Hennessy, told the court that both attorneys basically deserve to be sanctioned for their actions. He acknowledged that. And McLeland writes those sanctions have yet to be addressed. So he says, well, even your attorney, even the guy representing you, thinks that what you did deserves sanctions. So let's see those sanctions.
Was that a mistake for Hennessy to say that when you're looking at like how that could impact his client now?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously today it's easy to look at that and say, yeah, maybe he shouldn't have said that. But at the time, if you are facing, if you've done something so egregious that the court is saying Anya needs to be put to death.
Oh, geez, what did I do this time?
And I say, no, don't put her to death. Sure, she did something wrong, but just throw her in prison for 20 years.
Yeah.
So that's what was happening here.
That's true.
Because when the prospect of them being removed from the case was on the table, that was basically the death penalty for their continued representation of Richard Allen.
Right. So now it could be, they could get sanctions, but not necessarily.
So Hennessy didn't want to be in the position of saying, no, this is nothing at all.
Yeah, because that would look like minimizing and ridiculous at the time.
So he was being a good advocate, and I don't think it was a mistake for him to do that.
I remember thinking he did a very good job in that speech before the court, where he made some good points and sounded reasonable. So I guess this was part of that. But yeah, I'll be curious. We'll look more into this. We're kind of just recapping things now. What would be the penalties for contempt? Is this McLeland saying, I want them off? Or is this McLeland saying, we got to live with them, but they need to answer for what happened here.
Well, Hennessy was suggesting like financial penalties or things of that nature.
Okay, financial penalties.
Now, because of the gag order, the families of the victims have had to be silent. And they're very eloquent people, and you might wonder what they make of all of this. We get sort of a glimpse at how this has affected the families in this document, and I will read what McLeland wrote. The state was notified in the beginning of the leak by the defense by the families of the victims. Since that time, the state has had an opportunity to talk to the families of the victims about the photos and information that was leaked. The amount of harm and re-victimization that this has caused the families of the victims is unmeasurable and incurable.
Yeah. I think one thing that's disgusted me, and I know that's a strong word, but it's just how I feel about some of the discussion around the leak, is the minimization of the impact of this. Real world, real impact on people. People lost their kids. 2 children were murdered horribly, and now their families have to worry about seeing the crime scene whenever they log on in case some freak wants to send it to them. So I think it's very, very important to talk about the legal implications and whether or not people should or should not have been thrown off. That's all well and good. It's also very important to stretch Richard Allen's rights in all of this, because ultimately he is the central figure of the trial. We cannot forget that. Our Constitution is set up in a way to protect his rights and ensure things go smoothly. So all of the discussion around that, all the debate, people having very strong opinions on both sides, that is all well and good, in my opinion. Great, even. But the way some people talk about the leak...
They try to come up with like funny names for it. Or
yeah, like it's a little joke. It's a fun little joke.
This is why we talked with representatives of the parents of murdered children recently, because something like this really does victimize the families, and it puts them in an awful position. And like Prosecutor McLeland says, it's incurable.
Yeah, there's no fix.
There's no way to fix this. From now on, these families are aware that those pictures are out there, and they could pop up at any time, at any place. There's no way to fix that. So don't minimize it.
Yeah,
don't try to make it a joke.
It's not funny. It's not a joke. And there's no reason to do that, because I think you can strenuously advocate for, hey, they shouldn't have been thrown off about this. Here's the law. Here's how we can defend his rights. I think all of that is absolutely fine. We've had on people who've done that, and we will continue to do that, because I think they all made their points in a very zealous way that didn't necessarily minimize people's emotional suffering. But to indicate that this is no big deal is to erase the suffering of 2 families. And that's not right. We don't need to do that. We can be nuanced. We can say this was bad, but this shouldn't have happened. We can all hold different opinions in our heads and try to be compassionate when talking about serious issues. I just don't think... I think this aspect has been so lost, mostly because the family is gagged. You know?
And also, let's go back to the point McLeland made earlier in this document, that this leak was not a one-time leak of a few photographs. It was an ongoing leak for an extended period of time, revealing all sorts of confidential information that it was not in Richard Allen's interest to be revealed.
Yeah, and the letter that he wrote from prison does not indicate that he was made aware of the extent of this. And it doesn't really indicate anything more than just the kind of very, very broadest outlines of this. This is why I think I agreed with Mark Lehman. I believe he made a point during the open, the hearing, the arguments with the justices, that essentially, I mean, he didn't want there to be a hearing for Richard Allen, because that would have, in his view, damaged his rights. But that would have at least served letting him know what was going on. And he was basically kept in the dark certainly by the judge in this, by not having him come into the chambers meeting. But also I would really strongly wonder what he knows. What is the extent of what he knows? I would certainly hope his attorneys totally came clean to him and gave every detail about what had happened. I just don't know if we know that from the letter because it's so short and so
And
vague.
I really wish that there'd been a hearing where it could have been made clear to one and all in open court just what Richard
Because he
Allen did.
deserves, I mean, this man is on trial for his life, essentially. He deserves to know and make an informed choice and say, okay, I'm going to weigh the options. Here's what happened. Here are the implications. Here's what my choices are going forward. Again, much like the families have been forgotten in this, much like the girls have been forgotten in this, and they have been forgotten. People can use whatever hashtags they want. It doesn't mean that they actually care about justice for Abby and Libby. But also, caring about rights for Richard Allen doesn't always mean what people seem to think it means either. I think he's been forgotten in a lot of this. It's basically become a legal courtroom drama, and a lot of the people at the heart of it have been discarded.
So I'm going to read Prosecutor McLeland's conclusion. The press release and the 2 occasions of leaked information show a trend by defense counsels Brad Rozzi and Andrew Baldwin of not being completely honest with the court, violating the court's gag order set in place to protect the integrity of the case, and failing to comply with the protective order put in place to protect the discovery in the case. So essentially, those are the reasons he believes they have acted in a way that deserves some sort of sanctions for contempt.
Okay. So what happens next? We don't know. We'll see, I guess. I'm sure what that will happen, it'll be just some long, grueling ordeal that will take forever and delay the case, invariably.
And hopefully there won't be any other emergency episodes between now and the time we go to bed tonight. Thank you all for listening, and we'll chat again soon. Thanks so much for listening to The Murder Sheet. If you have a tip concerning one of the cases we cover, please email us at murdersheet@gmail.com. If you have actionable information about an unsolved crime, please report it to the appropriate authorities.
If you're interested in joining our Patreon, that's available at www.patreon.com/murdersheet. If you want to tip us a bit of money for records requests, you can do so at www.buymeacoffee.com/murdersheet. We very much appreciate any support.
Special thanks to Kevin Tyler Greenlee, who composed the music for The Murder Sheet, and who you can find on the web at kevintg.com.
If you're looking to talk with other listeners about a case we've covered, you can join the Murder Sheet discussion group on Facebook. We mostly focus our time on research and reporting, so we're not on social media much. We do try to check our email account, but we ask for patience as we often receive a lot of messages. Thanks again for listening.